At some point in your life, someone sat you down. A teacher, a parent, maybe a mentor you actually respected. And they said something to you that stuck. Not because it was kind, because it felt true. You need to focus. You start things and never finish them. You're scattered. Pick one thing and commit. And the worst part? You believed them. You looked at your half-finished guitar lessons, the coding project you abandoned, the 3 books on your desk with bookmarks stuck in chapter 2, the photography phase, the language app you deleted, the journal you kept for 11 days, and you thought, they're right. Something is wrong with me. You watched other people seem to glide effortlessly down a single lane, building expertise, stacking credentials, becoming the person who does that one thing, and you felt this quiet, persistent shame. Like your brain was a car that couldn't stay in gear. But what if that story, the one you've been carrying for years, is simply wrong? What if you were never broken? What if you were just misread? There's a term that career coach Barbara Sher introduced in her book, Refuse to Choose. She called it the scanner personality. And when people first encounter this concept, a strange thing happens. They don't feel curious. They feel relieved. Some of them cry. Sher found that almost every case of low self-esteem, shame, frustration, and feelings of inadequacy in the people she worked with simply disappeared the moment they understood that they were scanners and stopped trying to be somebody else. That's not a small thing. That's an entire identity unlocking. A scanner, as Sher describes it, is someone who is genetically wired to be interested in many things. Intense curiosity about numerous unrelated subjects is one of the most basic characteristics of a scanner, and curiosity, creativity, and learning are so essential to them that without these things, they can become genuinely depressed. This isn't a flaw in your character. This is your character. So what's actually happening inside the scanner brain? Let's go there for a moment. Your brain runs on a chemical called dopamine. You've heard of it. But here's what most people don't understand about dopamine. It's not really the pleasure chemical. It's the seeking chemical. The general function of dopamine is to promote exploration by facilitating engagement with cues of novelty and the reward value of new information. In other words, dopamine doesn't fire when you have something. It fires when you're discovering something. The hunt, the new angle, the moment a concept starts clicking into place. That's your neurological reward system doing exactly what it was designed to do. When something novel grabs your attention, it lights up the dopamine system, and even the anticipation of discovering something new triggers a dopamine release. This is why, once you're in pursuit of something novel, it can be hard to stop.
Your brain keeps anticipating the potential reward around the corner. Now here's where it gets fascinating. There's a phenomenon in neuroscience called latent inhibition. It's essentially your brain's filter. It screens out information your mind has already decided isn't relevant. Most people have a strong filter. They move through the world, and their brain quietly discards most of what doesn't fit their established path. Research has found that decreased latent inhibition is associated with increased creative achievement in high-functioning individuals. Scanner brains tend to have a lower filter. More gets in. More seems relevant. More connections get made between ideas that other people would never think to combine. This isn't distraction. It's a different architecture of perception. Imagine 2 cameras. One has a narrow telephoto lens, precise, zoomed in, built for depth. The other is a wide-angle lens, capturing the whole landscape in a single frame. Neither camera is broken. They just see different things. Your brain is the wide-angle lens. Think of your mind like a radar system, one that's been set to an unusually wide frequency. While others are locked onto a single signal, yours is constantly sweeping the horizon, picking up transmissions from multiple directions at once. The world calls this inability to focus, but a radar engineer would call it broad-spectrum sensitivity. The problem isn't the equipment. The problem is that someone handed you a radar and told you it should behave like a microscope. Scanner brains simply process information differently, which means they need a different set of skills and tools to navigate through life and work. When you move on from something once you've learned what you came for, that's not quitting. Multipotentialites rarely stop because something is too hard. They stop because their intellectual curiosity is satisfied, and they're drawn to move on to exploring the next challenge. Their finishing point is simply not the same as other people's. You were extracting the signal. Then you move to the next frequency. That's not laziness. That's efficiency at a scale most people can't perceive. Here's the question nobody asks. Why does this trait exist at all? Evolution doesn't keep mistakes around for thousands of years. If the scanner mind were purely a liability, it would have been selected out long ago. So why is it still here? Think about early human groups. You needed specialists, hunters who knew one trail deeply, who could track a single animal for hours. But you also needed scouts, people who could read many signals at once, who could notice that the river changed, that an unfamiliar plant was blooming, that a new path might lead somewhere worth knowing. People who could cross-connect information from wildly different domains and arrive at insights no single specialist would ever reach.
Throughout most of history, when the population was smaller and there wasn't such rapid technological advancement, versatility and the ability to stretch across domains was not just tolerated, it was celebrated. Think of Leonardo da Vinci, Thomas Edison. In centuries past, people pursued many interests and nobody blinked an eye. The scanner was the tribe's intelligence network, the one who kept the group adaptive, the one who could think in systems when everyone else was thinking in silos. That instinct didn't disappear. It just arrived in the 21st century without a job description, and that's where the friction comes from. Modern society was built on a very specific idea: specialize, optimize, monetize. The industrial age needed workers who could do one thing repeatedly at scale. And so schools were designed to train exactly that. Pick a major, choose a lane, hone your craft, find your niche. Through social cues and conditioning, we've learned to believe we must have one true calling, and that success can only come from narrowing down. University professors tell us to choose a major. Career coaches say to hone our craft. Business mentors say to find a niche. And if we make a career change or have gaps in our CV, we're asked to explain ourselves as though something went wrong. Nothing went wrong. The system was designed for one type of mind, and it learned to label every other type as a disorder, a deficiency, a lack of discipline. If you've spent years feeling like a failed specialist, consider that you were never a specialist to begin with. You were something else entirely. And something else entirely is not lesser. It's just different. So what do you actually do with this? First, stop trying to fix yourself. The energy you've spent fighting your own nature is energy that could be redirected into using it. Many scanners thrive by creating what Barbara Sher called a portfolio life, where multiple interests coexist instead of competing. Instead of forcing themselves into one rigid identity, they explore several areas that energize them, combining different skills into unique careers, creative projects, or entrepreneurial ventures. Second, give your ideas a home. One of the most practical things you can do is keep what Sher called a daybook, a dedicated space where your curiosities and half-formed ideas can land without turning into pressure. When ideas have a place to rest, they stop competing for urgent attention inside your head. Third, stop measuring yourself by someone else's finish line. You finish things. You just finish them differently. You finish them when they've given you what you came for. And fourth, look for the connective thread between your interests. Scanners often discover in retrospect that all their seemingly unrelated obsessions were actually circling the same question from different angles. The photography, the psychology, the writing, the coding, they were never random. They were a map you were drawing without realizing it. As Barbara Sher put it, a good enough job is a subsidy to the art. There are a number of things you want to do when you're a scanner that will never pay money or won't for years. You don't want to hitch the profit wagon to everything you're talented at. That's not settling, that's strategy. There's a version of your life where you spend the next decade still trying to be a different kind of person, still white-knuckling your way through a single focus, still apologizing for every new interest that catches your eye like light off water. And there's another version, one where you accept, quietly and completely, that your mind was built to roam, that curiosity is not your enemy, it's your instrument, that the world does not only need depth, it also needs breadth. It needs the people who can walk into a room full of specialists and find the thing nobody else could see because they've been paying attention to everything. You were never the student who couldn't focus. You were the student who was interested in too much, which is a completely different problem with a completely different solution. You don't need to be fixed. You need to be understood. And maybe, after all this time, the person who most needs to understand you is you.